In this video, I will show you how to reassemble the motor on a Singer 301. Hi, I'm Jim with Sewing Machine Rehab, and I show you how to restore, repair, and maintain your vintage sewing machines. If you're watching today, please make sure to check the description box below. You'll find a link on how to disassemble this motor, as well as the link to my full Singer 301 restoration series. And while you're at it, please give this video a thumbs up if you like it and subscribe to my channel for more content. Now let's go ahead and put this motor back together. Now, before we reassemble the motor, let's go over all of the parts that you should have with you. The top half of the motor, the housing, it holds the armature, the commutator, the shaft that rides all the way through the top, where you have this worm gear that connects with the gear on the hand wheel. It's all one big piece. And you'll want to make sure that it spins freely before you proceed. If this doesn't turn easily, then send me a message. I'll explain to you what to do. But it could be that the bearing in the very top here is going bad, and you need to address that first. You also should make sure that you cleaned your commutator, and starting with some rubbing alcohol and then just a pencil eraser is a great way to start. If there are deep grooves or you're having trouble getting it clean, you can try a honing stick, but that's really best once the motor is actually back in the machine and you can get it to spin. And then you kind of have to go in with a brush cover removed and touch it up just a little bit, not much, with a honing stick. Remember, the copper on this commutator is actually very thin, so too much scrubbing and scratching can be a bad thing. So then you should also have your coil or core of wires, and you should have a couple little posts here that you might want to make sure they're polished up. Using Brasso's a really good option as long as you wipe it all off when you're done. And the same with these little leads here. I clean them with Brasso as well. And a pencil eraser would also work to clean them off, just so the contact is really good. You have the bottom half of your motor, and this is where we're going to reinstall our little felt pad and grease wick, which I have actually a new one here, and it doesn't look as clean as it did because I actually had it in the motor and ran the motor before I shot this video and took it back apart. But you should have a grease wick with fresh grease loaded onto it and a little felt pad. If you don't have this felt pad, if it wasn't there when you took the motor apart, don't sweat it. But if it was, you want to put it back. Then you will have the bearing that goes in the bottom that sits on top of the felt pad. We'll be putting that back in the machine. Your brush covers, the 2 screws for your brush covers. These are the motor housing screws. They're really long. You should have 2. And then you should have the little insert nuts that these screws are going to screw into one side, and the brush housing screws or the cap covers are going to screw into the other side. You should have this little insulator. It may or may not have these little tabs coming out. You should have a little wedge. You should have the clip that's going to hold down our bearing right here. And quickly too, just wipe this off. Do not put any chemicals on this. Wipe it off really well with the rag. And then if you want, you can actually put a very, very light coating of grease on this bearing to get it started again. Over here are the brush housings. These brushes, you should have 2 of each. are going to fit down inside the spring side first, and they are designed to perfectly hold your brush. And I believe that's it. So what do we do first? Well, first thing we'll want to do is go ahead and start putting this part back together. And that just means you're going to take your little felt pad, if you had it, and you're going to put it down into the bottom. And then your grease wick, I think you'll find if you took it out that it's easiest to put it back in just using a pair of tweezers, and it should fit right into that hole. And if you look, it's going to stick out a little bit, and that's actually okay. We want it to do that because it needs to make contact with the bearing. I'm just making sure I have it all the way in as far as it will go, because it's greasing the bearing. So if it's not touching the bearing, it can't grease the bearing. So a little bit sticking out, that's a good thing. Now we can take our bearing and just set it down in the bottom. And if you look at your bearing, if you have this little cutout right here, I like to point that towards the grease wick. I don't know if that really makes a difference, but that's just how I always put them back. And then last, to hold all of this together, we need our little clip, and it looks like a sombrero a little bit. So imagine this is a little person's head, and you're going to set the sombrero on the head, and these little wings are going to be angled up. If you look down inside, you'll see there's some little cutouts in the plastic or the Bakelite or whatever this is made out of. And when you put this in, you're going to have to push these little wings under these cutouts, and you will push down and twist clockwise to do that. And it does take a little bit of pressure with your thumbs, so just kind of take a deep breath. And sometimes if you can just get one side a little bit started and then work the other side until you get them both in, and you will be able to do it. I'm working around the camera, so I have one side sort of started there. If you heard that click, everything fastened into place. They're all the way turned clockwise as far as they will go. And then what I do is I just take something like the end of my paintbrush and make sure that that bearing is straight and centered in the bottom, because when we put this all back together, the end of this shaft right below the commutator is going to sit and rest down inside that hole. So what do we do next? Well, I like to go ahead and put the coil back in, and the way that it goes, if you look, you have these two holes in the plastic, and they are going to match up with these two posts. So as you start to feed this back together, it may help you to straighten these wires out just a little bit, because you kind of want them to feed on through the holes in the bottom here. So putting it together, whoops, turn it this way, gotta have the post where they were supposed to go. And look, see, these are popping up through the bottom. I just want to make sure they don't get pinched or trapped or bent. Now, these wires should feed all the way to the right and left sides within the plastic. That's how they're going to fit in there perfectly, and we're going to get the motor back together. So then you just kind of have to push the post down through the two holes in the plastic so they pop through the other side. And you'll just line them up, and then you should see them out here. So we have the posts through the holes. The wires aren't coming up through the center here, they're tucked away to the sides. And our little terminals here are free and clear, and they're not trapped. So that's the next step. Now, what we're going to put in next is we're going to wedge this all together, and it's obvious which way it goes. This tab here is lining up with this tab here, and I just like to start to set this in, but then go ahead and add my insulator and my wedge, and you'll figure out which is easiest to do first. For me, I just add this insulator in, and then I add the wedge. There's a little cutout that it'll just slide down into, and that little wedge is going to keep everything together nice and tight, and it's also going to stop any vibration that might happen. And then you're just going to kind of wiggle it until it all goes together, and it should fit perfectly nice and tight all the way around. So hold the motor upside down, grab one of your little insert nuts and just drop it down into the hole here. Then find one of your longer screws, and it doesn't hurt to oil the threads of these just a little bit. Just helps it feed. And then I find, so the hole I'm looking for, let me show you, is the hole that is right here. I'm going to just slide that screw up in. Now see, I can see it's pushing against the nut. I can go ahead and just holding everything together with one hand, go ahead and tighten up the screw. Do not tighten it all the way yet. Wait until you have them both in, and then just tighten them both down one after the other, but at least get it threaded and started there. Now my little insert nut's not falling out, so I drop in the other nut. Hold it with my finger. Sometimes they're a little funny. I don't know what the screw has to push past, but I'll double check to make sure I don't have this just slightly crooked. That's why I said don't tighten down one and then put the other one in, because if it's just a little crooked and the other screw is too tight, you won't be able to adjust it to get the holes to line up. So I'm just loosening that one a little bit. There we go. So that's why you don't want to tighten it down all the way until you have them both into the little nut inserts. Now I can go ahead and start tightening both of these down all the way. So if I did this right, I will not have any gaps around the outside edge. It will go together seamlessly. Everything will be smooth, and I can still spin my worm gear up top. So we'll grease this right before we put it back in the machine. We're touching it now. There's no reason to put the grease on yet, so that we'll do later. So what you have left to do is to just insert in your brushes and put on the covers. So I'm going to set this down for a moment. For your brushes, if you look at them, there should be one edge that is, well, two edges technically. There is a little bit of curve if you're not putting new brushes in. New brushes will be flat and it won't matter which way you put them in. But if your brushes were fine and you just wiped them off and now you're going to put them back in, you want to make sure that the way the brush goes in and presses against the commutator, the curve of the brush matches the curve of the commutator. So it can go this way, but not this way. It can go this way, but not that way. I don't know, I mean, I guess you could mark a right and a left when you took them out, but I think as long as you get the curve to match the curve on the commutator, it doesn't matter if I'm using this side up or that side up. So how do we put these back? Well, we're going to want to first take our little terminals, and you see there's a little groove cut out right here in the plastic, just right there. This is where this terminal is going to rest. So you're going to kind of have to hold that in place while you're putting your brushes back in. So I like to take my little housing for the brush, and I just kind of scoop up one of the springs or brushes, and with the cutout part of this housing facing up, and the tab will always be, you see this little tab right here, it will always be facing away from you, and the curve of the brush turned like the curve of the commutator, I'm going to hold my little terminal kind of in this little slot here with one finger. I'm going to slide my brush past it, and then I should be able to sort of wiggle this in, and I, whoop, see, it popped out. It's going to happen to you too, don't worry about it. Just start over. Always, if you start over, make sure that you still have the curve in the brush angled the right way. Also, the housing turned the right way. And see, this is coming up now. My brush isn't down inside this anymore. That's all right. Keep this terminal pressed down. Keep the housing pressed right into the groove, and just slowly, gently push, and it will slide right onto your brush. And then what you want to do is just push it flush against the edge of the plastic here. Now stop and make sure that this housing actually isn't up against the commutator. This one isn't. There's just a tiny bit, I mean hardly a 1/16 of an inch of brush coming out of the end, and that's what's hitting the commutator. If your housing is hitting the commutator, stop. It needs to come back a little bit. It shouldn't ever do that if it was made properly, but if it is, if you have this brass hitting up against your commutator, you're going to destroy it. So you should always have just a little bit of that brush sticking out, the carbon part of the brush sticking out of the end of the brass, and that's what's making contact. So my terminal is pressed down, my brush is all the way in. I can go ahead and add my brush cover. There we go. See, if I had grease on that worm gear, it would just be getting everywhere right now. When you add your brush covers on, you should notice that this is perfect, seamless, nothing's bumping out, the cover isn't sticking out further than this edge here on the bottom of the motor. They should all line up. And then you can just tighten it up. Tighten them, but remember, you're going to want to service this at some point, so don't make it so tight that you can't get it out again. And then we just repeat with the other brush. So I'm tucking my terminal down into this little hole or groove. I get my brush housing, and I'm going to scoop up my little brush, Then I'm going to look and make sure that that curve, do you see how it has a curve in it? That's matching up with the commutator. Holding the terminal down with my finger. Cut side is up, tabs pointing away from me. Then I'm just slowly going to slide everything into place. And it went up over the carbon, and I'm pushing it all the way in now. If you don't have it all the way in, you probably won't be able to get the cover on. And now I'm looking down here, and there's just a tiny bit of brush coming out of the end of this little brass housing. This housing is not making contact with the copper here. Only the carbon is. That's good. The terminal here is pushed down. Everything's seated properly. I can slide my other brush cover on. And screw it into place. And that's it. Everything is back together. Now, take a little look around your table. Make sure you don't have any extra parts laying around that you forgot, because if you did, you need to stop and figure out what you left out. Once you have this all back together, this is all seamless. Nothing's bumped out. Your posts are properly sticking out. You should be able to spin this. Now that it's making contact with the carbon brushes, it might not spin as fast or easily, but it should spin. You shouldn't hear any weird noises, no metal rubbing noises or anything like that. That's it. The motor's back together and it's ready to go back into our machine. So the next time we come back, we will actually get all the wiring back into the machine properly so we can install the motor. And then we will probably put the tension back on because we're getting really close to wrapping this series up. So thank you so much for watching. I hope everyone's doing well. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye.